What's up everybody, Ryco here. Today, I've got a deck profile for you. That's right, at my local tournament, I just went undefeated with Melodious for a box tournament. There were definitely some good players there, but in the end, we pulled through with pure Melodious. I'm just gonna go ahead and run through the deck profile for you guys. Before we jump right in, thank you all so much for your continuous support. If you're not already subscribed, be sure to like and subscribe as it helps a lot. But with that, you know what? Let's just jump right into the video. So starting off with the main deck, we've got, of course, 3 Refrain. This is a given. You're going to be maxing out on her in every list. We've got 3 Couplé. Couplé is a fantastic card. It's basically Pop Larb. A little worse, but excellent for the strategy. And then we're only playing 2 Soprano. Soprano is an excellent card, but it can be a bit cloggy, and if you're playing it correctly, especially since we're not playing the Desires builds, it's fine to just have 2. And then for the one-ofs, we've got 1 Sonata, 1 Cannon. These are the extenders. I know a lot of people play more Sonata, but honestly, it's just not the best card. If you're having to go into the Link 2 because you got hand trapped a bunch, chances are they're probably going to hand trap the Link 2 as well. Also, it can be a bit cloggy. It's nice to have it, but overall, you'd rather have hand traps going second than just an extra Sonata. We are playing the 1 Aria. Aria is a fantastic card. We're not playing the other one that prevents card destruction, as it can be bricky. It's harder to get out, but this one is perfect. It comes up quite often. This battle protection actually bought me a turn during the tournament, which ended up allowing me to turn around and OTK the next turn. So overall, Aria is a fantastic card. Definitely recommend playing her. And then the last card being the big brick, but she's too good not to play. It's Shopina, of course. Fun fact, you can add back Herald of Orange Light with this card. And that actually came up a few times during the tournament. So definitely something to consider. It's a great card. Overall, definitely need to play it. Continuing with the really broken spells, and the reason why arguably this deck is even competitively viable in the first place, we've got 3 Ostinato. Gotta love branded fusions that aren't hard once per turn. Granted, you need to have no monsters on the field, but if they Ash this or they Bell this, yes, they can Ghost Spell this. And if you drew another one, or if you have Prosp to dig for another one, it definitely helps. It comes up, great card, need to max out on it. We are playing, of course, the first movement solo as well. Thankfully, these have gone down in terms of market price over the past few weeks, but overall, this is still a great card. You definitely need to run it. Keep in mind, it does lock you into Melodious, so you can't really go for the Baguska play, for example, if you're playing first movement solo, but overall, it's still a solid card. It's a 1-card starter. Definitely need to play it. And then, of course, we are playing the 1 Concerto. This is the only searchable Melodious spell trap in the deck, because first movement solo and Ostinato are not Melodious cards, so you can't search them, but Concerto, you only need 1 because it replaces itself. Super solid card. Moving forward, we have the consistency cards. That's right, the cards that help you actually combo. And of course, we've got 3 Prosperity. Now, a lot of people are deciding to go with Pot of Desires for this deck, but it doesn't really fix the problem with the deck. For example, if you draw 4 non-engine, or if you draw 4 hand traps, for example, and a pot card, you would rather the pot card be Prosperity than Desires. Don't get me wrong, getting that extra card in your hand off Desires is nice, especially with Herald of Orange Light, but again, it doesn't really fix the consistency with the deck in that you need to see Ostinato or first movement solo as much as possible because those are your best cards in the deck. Desires makes it a little harder to get to those while banishing your pieces and making your grind game worse as well. Whereas with Prosperity, it's a great card. Although it can conflict with the draw you get with Concerto, it's still very powerful, especially since post-siding you can also dig for your side cards, which does come up, and it came up. So overall, highly recommend Prosperity over Desires, as it's a lot better for fixing this deck's issue. And then continuing, of course, we've got 3 Crossout. This card will help you combo. It's very necessary. Not everybody's playing hand traps, and this may change going post Infinite Forbidden, especially since a lot of people are looking to switch to board breakers with cards such as Droplet, Dark Ruler, Evenly, Book of Eclipse, stuff like that. And we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But for now, Crossout's definitely good because, again, this deck is playing a lot of hand traps because that's what this deck does. Speaking of which, let's jump right into the hand traps and the Crossout targets technically too. We've got 3 Ash Blossom. This card is just generically good. Shouldn't really have to go too much into that. We've got 3 Herald of Orange Light. This is arguably one of the best reasons to play Melodious because it has access to Herald of Orange Light. And as mentioned before, you can add back Orange Light with Shopina. Yeah, this card's very, very good. It was definitely one of the MVPs of the tournament. Yeah, definitely one of the best reasons to play this deck. of course, we've got 3 Imperm. This is arguably one of the best hand traps this format and will continue to be one of the best hand traps because it can also act as a pseudo board breaker. And if you draw it for your 6th card, it's not bad as well. Very, very good. And then here's where we start playing some 2-ofs and 1-ofs for hand traps. Play 2 Valor. I didn't max out on Valor because at the locals I go to, Valor's not really the best hand trap. Of course, you can change your hand trap ratios depending on where you're going. If you're going to a big tournament, if you're going to a locals, whatever you're expecting, you can adjust your ratios for there, but this seemed to work out really well for me. I'm also playing 2 Ogre. Ogre is a fantastic card. It's not a game ender against most decks, but for a 2nd and maybe a 3rd hand trap, Ghost Ogre can definitely put in a lot of work. The real MVP of the tournament was 2 Ghost Bell. This caught a lot of people off guard. No one was really playing around Ghost Spell. It just worked out really well. Overall, it's a solid card. Again, it depends on your meta, but how many people are siding Bestials, and depending on the decks playing, there was like Labyrinth, for example. There were certain decks that just randomly lost the Bell. So overall, Bell was a really, really good card. And then the last card I'm playing is 1 Ghost Mourner. Mourner is just a solid card. I'm playing 1 of because it's a cross-out target, and it's essentially my 3rd copy of Valor. It is a hard once per turn, so I didn't want to max out on it either. Overall, it's very good. And that's the main deck. The main deck count is 41, I believe. Yeah, it worked out really well for me overall, especially with Prosperity. The consistency was really good. Continuing with the extra deck. For the links, you've got 1 Gravity Controller. This is just so you can summon Baja in the extra monster zone, and if they impermanent, Valor, Mourner, any of those effect negation hand traps, then you can link it off into Gravity Controller and special summon from the grave and continue combo. Playing the 1 of Haggard Lizard Dose. Yeah, words. English. This card is very good. It doesn't come up quite often, but after turn 1, or if you're in turn 2 or 3, if you're putting monsters on the field and you have an Ostinato and you need to clear field, any 2 monsters with different names, so you can use an Nibiru token, for example, you just banish this, draw a card, and now you have a clear field. So yeah, this clears your field. Having these kinds of cards are pretty essential in this deck, but a lot of the times you can just banish it off Prosp anyways if you're going first. And then of course we're playing the 1 Bloom Harmonist. This card is absolutely custom, but you'll never need more than 1, because if you're having to go into a 2nd one, chances are you're losing that game anyway, and chances are the 2nd one will get interrupted as well. Overall, it's a very solid card. Specials 2 from the deck and turns monsters it points to into Utopia the Lightning or Armades, depending on the Yu-Gi-Oh era you're from. But your opponent can't activate anything when opponents these this card points to battle. Very good. It actually comes up quite often. Yeah. Very, very good card. You definitely at least have to play 1. And then continuing with the links, we've got 1 SP Little Knight. Just a very good card. And in simplified game states, if you're not Melodious locked, this is just a solid card to go into. I'm not playing the IP Masquerena. Honestly, if you're having to make IP Masquerena, you're probably losing that game anyways. It's just not really necessary. I'd rather commit more extra deck spots to when you actually get to play the game. And SP Little Knight's just one of those cards you got to keep it in. It's just too good. It comes up from time to time. And then we're playing 1 Protector of the Agent's Moon. This is your out to skill drain and another way to clear your field. To activate Ostinato, you contribute itself as cost to pop a card on the field. Comes up from time to time, and overall it's just solid removal, so definitely worth playing. And then we're playing 1 Underworld Goddess. I did Goddess someone for game. I highly recommend playing this card. A lot of people don't really expect this card right now. Honestly, if they're not prepared for it and they set themselves up to get Goddess, it can just completely turn the tide of the duel in your favor. And those are the links. Moving on to the fusion, we've got 1 Bloom Deep. I know a lot of people have been cutting this, but it's still a really good card. And against certain matchups, for example, Tenpai, if they don't draw like Droplet, this is just a very difficult card to get rid of and can buy you turns on its own. It's a solid float target for Magnificat, and overall, it comes up from time to time. I would recommend finding the spot for this if you have the space. Of course, we've got 2 Schuberta. This is just DD Crow on legs, but better because it also modifies the damage stats, so you can do it in the damage step because it modifies its own attack points. So if you're playing against something like Fire King and they're doing a bunch of stuff in the damage step, you could still banish their cards from the grave or banish your card. It came up to where my opponent tried to call by the grave a Herald of Orange Light, and I was able to just banish it because you can banish it from your grave as well. Very solid card. One of the most broken fusions in the deck. It's against certain matchups, it's just game. Of course, we've got 2 Baja. I know a lot of people are playing 3, but this is pretty recyclable. You can either either put it back with Shapina, you can put it back with Chrono. Overall, the third copy never really comes up, so in order to make some more extra deck space, I'm only playing 2. The third copy never came up. If you're resolving your combo, chances are you're winning anyways, and if you need to float into a second one, you'll have that second one, because Magnificat can also summon into this. Overall, it's very solid, but 3 is not really necessary if you're playing it correctly. And then for the last 2 fusions, of course, we've got 2 Magnificats. This is one of the most broken boss monsters I've seen in a while. It does so much for the archetype, and nothing super oppressive either. Like, there's no floodgate built in on this card, but it's just super interactive. It floats, it's very sticky, it's hard to get rid of. Overall, solid card. You don't need to max out on it, but playing 2 is just right. And then for the last 2 cards, we are playing 1 Baguska and 1 Typhon. Baguska is a solid card. For example, you can end on Baguska, Magnificat, and Baja, and because Baja stops your Magnificat from being negated, Magnificat can still trigger to bounce an opponent's card under Baguska because of Baja. So that's a really cute interaction. I don't really go into Baguska quite often, to be honest, because a lot of the times if your opponent has something to deal with it, if they have a Dark Ruler, if they have an Imperm, if they have a Droplet. For example, if they have Imperm and they know you're going to be going to the Baguska line, it's just easy outable, so I'd rather just commit to. A lot of the times the end field I'm going to be going for is Magnificat with an Aria and 1 to 2 Schuberta. That's usually what I try and aim for, but against certain decks, Baguska is just an MVP, so I still decided to play it. But honestly, you can cut this. It's not the best card, especially since you can out it with SP Little Knight as well. But overall, it's fine. For this build, it ended up working out. I didn't make it all day, but it came up in testing, it came up in the past, but it is risky, so keep that in mind. And then Typhon's just a great card. In simplified game states, if you get hand trapped a bunch going second, you still have that extra oomph, that extra push to help maybe let you win. I think it's just too generic and too good to not play. And that's the extra deck, clean 15. And then moving on to the side deck. The side deck was pretty solid today. I wouldn't really change much. I'd maybe change around 1 or 2 things, but I'll get to that in a moment. So of course we're playing 2 DD Crow. This is just a good card. There's a lot of decks that just kind of fold to this, and it was between this or a Magnamut and a Druisworm, but I was a little afraid of Pearly as well, and so this hits Pearly pretty well, and just generically it just hits more. Like, don't get me wrong, the Bestials are absolutely fantastic, but DD Crow is just really solid. Also, the Bestials, they have to be in the monster zone, and if you Bestial someone, draw for turn, and you rip like an Ostinato off the top of the deck or first movement solo, you're kind of upset. So you want to keep your field zone clear. That's why you don't play Nib in this deck either. You just want your clear monster zone to resolve your cards. But so overall, DD Crow, it was definitely a solid card. Post Infinite Forbidden, I'll probably be bumping this up, maybe even be putting it in the main deck. That's a bridge to cross once we get there. We played 3 Droll and Lockbird. This card was fantastic for me during the tournament. I love this card going into this meta. Don't get me wrong, it's a pretty oppressive card against some decks, but it's just needed versus some decks. And specifically with Melodious, you want them to pass turn with as little interruption as possible. And so this definitely helps a lot with that, because versus a lot of decks, for example, against U-Bell, it makes their deck a lot more manageable, and going into a Fiendsmith format, this will also stop their plays and their tracks quite often. Play 1 Tam Tam, burns 500, not much to say. Play 1 Called by the Grave in the side. It's just a solid side card for helping you resolve your combo going first. You don't really want to main deck it because you're also playing a bunch of hand traps, so it doesn't feel good if, like, for example, your opponent Ash Blossoms you and you Called by it and you have an Ash in hand. It's just not the best in the world. You can side accordingly to make Called by a much better card going first post siding. And then the rest of the side deck was Thrust with Thrust targets. I played 2 Thrust. This is a solid card. There's a lot of Thrust targets that are just good right now. Also, Thrust being able to search you Ostinato going second is fantastic. It didn't come up this tournament, but it came up in previous tournaments, and Thrust in this deck specifically, at least siding it, is definitely solid, and I would recommend giving it a try. And then for the Thrust targets, we've got 1 Talents, which came up, I didn't talent someone, but I used cross out on talents, and it essentially won me the game on the spot. 1 Harpy's Feather Duster, just a solid going second blowout versus some decks. Those are the 2 spells. And then for the traps, we've got 1 Evenly. It's just a solid going second card. Thrusting into it isn't really the best, because sometimes you have to thrust when you already have cards committed to the field, so evenly is not really the best in that regard, but sometimes I'll just side this in just on its own, and you know what, if you draw it, you draw it, if you don't, you don't. Plus you're playing props, so you can dig for it anyways. Solid overall. If you resolve it, you're pretty much in a really good spot. One threatening roar. This is just for 10 pi. This is something you could probably think about changing, because we're also playing one D barrier, and D barrier essentially does the same thing versus 10 pi. It just shuts down their turn pretty easily. You could probably take out threatening roar for something else, maybe a third crow. I don't know, whatever you feel is best for the meta of where you're playing. But overall, sometimes you never know when 10 pi players are going to walk in and make your day horrible, so it's good to have it there. It's a safety pick. And then one DDG, different dimension ground. If you can just set up your combo and then flip this on your opponent's turn, you're winning most of the time. A lot of your cards, once your combo is set up, you don't need the graveyard, especially since you have the DD Crow, of course. But if you drew this, you can go for the Baguska line with the bounce, and that's usually like enough, especially paired with this. Even if they imperm the Baguska at that point, they're gonna have a hard time playing around this. Of course, you're not gonna side this into matchups where it's bad. So if you're siding this in versus something like Snake Eye or Ubel and you flip it, chances are you're probably winning that game. And that's the whole deck. That's the Melodious deck. If you all stuck around until the end, thank you so much. Again, please consider subscribing if you're not already subscribed, and drop a like on this video as it helps a bunch. Thank you all so much again, and until next time, peace.